Every movie, talent show, and viral success story tells us the same thing, that fame and fortune is the ultimate goal for creative people. But we almost never ask the question that matters most. Is it really worth it? In many cases, creative success breaks you. It rewires your mind, consumes your identity, and if you're not careful, turns your deepest vulnerabilities into public spectacle. Your emotions become someone else's entertainment. Your thoughts and ideas turn into products to be bought and sold as content. Working as a high-level creative person is pressure. You put a piece of yourself out there for people to judge, misinterpret, or just ignore entirely. This doesn't just happen to famous creative people. It can happen to anyone who takes their creative work seriously. Back in design school, I pulled all-nighters building prototypes, sanding until my hands cramped. And at first, that passion feels like freedom, but it can slowly turn into obsession and even self-exploitation. And that's the danger. Creative success doesn't always free you. Sometimes it traps you in ways you don't even notice. By the end of this video, you'll understand the real cost of creative ambition and how it can easily go too far. The higher you climb, the worse it gets. It's most obvious in live performance where the creative process happens in real time with nowhere to hide. Just look at Elvis, Amy Winehouse, or Michael Jackson. On the outside, we see the transformation, the plastic surgery, the addiction, and the stumbling on stage. But the damage on the inside is often far worse. And it's not just musicians. Any creative person who sells their ideas to an audience, whether it's designers, artists, filmmakers, chefs, writers, all of them have to contend with that same pressure. If you decide to fully commit to creative ambition, you will not be the same person you were when you started, and you might not like what you become. Take Michelangelo, for example. His paintings in the Sistine Chapel are some of the most iconic works in Western art. But most people don't know this. He didn't want to do these paintings. He had never even painted a fresco before. He was a sculptor. But the Pope practically forced him to take on the commission. So for 4 long years, Michelangelo painted while craning his body up towards the ceiling, neck contorted, powders from the paint falling into his eyes. By the end of the project, some say he couldn't bend his neck to look down at his own feet. He wrote poems about the emotional and physical pain the work caused him. He hated the project. We celebrate the result as a masterpiece, but no one ever thinks about the cost. Michelangelo gave everything to a project that he hated, for patrons he didn't respect, to earn the adoration of people he would never meet. Now, I know that some people are probably thinking, this guy painted a ceiling, became immortalized forever, and you expect me to feel bad for him? Billions of people do horrible, back-breaking work and get zero recognition. And that's all true. But keep watching, and you'll see that successful creative people are at the mercy of much bigger forces. Creative success doesn't always solve your old problems, and it introduces a lot of new ones. Antoni Gaudí is a great example. At just 31 years old, he began designing the Sagrada Familia, a cathedral so intricate and surreal, it's hard to tell whether it was designed by a genius or a madman. The level of details borders on the comically absurd. After losing several close friends in the early 1910s, Gaudí completely isolated himself and poured all of his energy into designing the church. He turned down other lucrative projects in New York and Paris. He refused to sit down for press interviews. He even moved into the unfinished construction site of the church so he could spend every waking moment near his creation. In his later years, Gaudí neglected his appearance entirely, wearing shabby clothes and no longer shaving. Designing the cathedral was his only purpose. At age 73, he was hit by a trolley car while on his way to church. By this point, Gaudí was so disheveled that no one realized who he was. He was mistaken for a homeless man. And by the time anyone recognized him, it was too late. He passed away. Gaudí was chasing transcendence through his work, and he spent over 40 years of his life consumed by it. Unfortunately, he never lived to see it finished. The cathedral is now slated for completion in the late 2020s, an entire century after his passing. Today, the Sagrada Familia is celebrated as a masterpiece, but like so many works of creative genius, it came at the cost of the person who made it. So, what drives people to this transformation? It's not random. It's all part of a complicated yet predictable system, and there are 3 main forces that tend to break successful creative people. The first factor is commerce. If you want to be successful, all large-scale creative work has to serve money or power. It's been this way for hundreds, if not thousands of years. We love to romanticize creativity as pure self-expression. That image of the lone artist following their muse, unbothered by the crowd, is seductive, but it's totally unrealistic for people who are seeking to reach even a modest level of success with their work. Successful creative people might have power and notoriety, but they're still at the mercy of a master. They need to please a client, a patron, a platform, an algorithm, or some kind of audience. On that note, if you're liking this video, you should subscribe. All creative people have to do this. Even Michelangelo, one of the most successful artists to ever live, had to take on a commission to paint something that he hated for 4 years straight. If you don't satisfy your audience, you don't eat. I've been seeing these clips of famous music producer turned creative guru Rick Rubin talk about the creative process a lot. Here's one clip.
The audience comes last.
Isn't the whole music business built around trying to figure out what somebody likes?
Maybe for someone else it is, but it's not for me.
Don't let the Zen Buddhist vibes fool you. Rick Rubin has worked with some of the most famous musicians in the world. His literal job is to take raw artistic energy and package it into something that sells. Rick Rubin's claim that the audience comes last sounds noble, but it collapses under real scrutiny. I mean, sure, you shouldn't pander too much to an audience and you shouldn't chase trends too hard, but in practice, putting the audience last is a luxury that really is reserved for multi-millionaire creatives who can afford to tank a project and still be okay. Rick Rubin is a prime example. Now, I agree with Rubin that predicting audience tastes can be a fool's errand, and it's good to trust your intuition sometimes, but pretending the audience doesn't matter is naive at best or elitist at worst. Don't get me wrong, it can be healthy to prioritize your own creative vision, and sometimes creating something is more about personal expression. You can learn a lot about your process by putting the audience last, but don't expect to become successful from it. And don't assume that the best work is going to come from that approach. Remember the Star Wars prequels? George Lucas had full creative control. He clearly put the audience last, and it shows. He thought he was untouchable and didn't need to consider other perspectives. There's only one thing I need to say. Jar Jar Binks. It's an insanely overdone meme at this point, but that's because it's the perfect example of putting the audience last in the worst way possible. Lucas did achieve commercial success through the prequels, but he was so hurt by the criticism that he went into semi-retirement. The audience demands purity while also punishing artists for sincere creative expressions if it doesn't match their tastes. Now, sometimes an artist will shun the audience, reinvent themselves, and become even more successful. Bob Dylan went from folk music to rock and got booed off stage at first, but he came out the other side as a legend. The Beatles shifted genres and identities multiple times and only got bigger, but that's exactly why they're iconic. They pulled off what no one else could. Their prestige comes from the fact that they survived the backlash. Most artists don't. For every Dylan or Beatles, there are a million other creatives who put the audience last and don't make it. Plus, most of the world's greatest art is commissioned or funded by someone else. Michelangelo didn't paint the Sistine Chapel out of pure creative impulse. He was hired to do it for someone else, and like I said, he hated it. But that doesn't make it any less brilliant. Commercial intent doesn't inherently corrupt creativity, and pure emotional self-expression isn't automatically better. It all depends on the work. Remember Gaudi? Even his architecture was funded by wealthy patrons. If they weren't on board with his creative vision, he would have had to change it to suit them. Rubin's quote is designed to sound good, and ironically, that proves my point. His quote is a performance that's crafted specifically for an audience who want to believe him. His quote actually puts the audience first, because it ignores his decades of knowledge as an extremely successful creative person. Rubin himself doesn't even believe what he's saying. Just listen to what he says here.
But sometimes there's just a disconnect. Like, I got to do a track with Roy Orbison. He really didn't want to sing the high note at the end of the song, and you really want Roy Orbison to sing the high note at the end. Right. So it was not, he wouldn't have chosen to do that, but I didn't feel like it was a proper Roy Orbison record if he didn't do that.
And I'm not faulting Rubin for this, I just think he should be more honest about it. We're all trying to survive in a system driven by commerce. I mean, case in point, my friend Rafi and I wrote a book about navigating creative ambition in a world that runs on money. Click the link in the description if you want to get notified when it comes out. And yes, the irony is painfully obvious to me, but seriously, go check it out. It's really good. The reason why Rubin's claims about pure expressions of creativity are so popular, in spite of them being obviously untrue, is simple. It's painful to compromise your personal creative expression for money. It's easier to believe we live in a world where you can just express yourself freely and the success and accolades and money will follow. But that's not reality. And even though most creative success is about serving commercial interests, there's still deep emotional investment involved. You're turning your most intimate ideas into commodities, and over time, that transaction leads to something harder to shake: alienation. Unlike Rick Rubin, Bo Burnham is brutally honest about how much the audience defines his creative experience. Bo Burnham is one of YouTube's first breakout stars, and he has spent 2 decades performing for an audience of millions. His special Inside is a surreal mix of absurdist musical comedy and existential dread. It cemented him as a master of turning vulnerability into spectacle. In his live performance of Can't Handle This, Burnham starts light, joking about Pringle cans and burritos and first world problems. But halfway through, the tone shifts. He says, "I can sit here and pretend like my biggest problems are Pringles cans and burritos, but the truth is, my biggest problem is you, the audience." Then comes a downward spiral. "I want to please you, but I want to stay true to myself. I want to give you the night out that you deserve, but I want to say what I think and not care what you think about it. A part of me loves you, a part of me hates you, a part of me needs you, a part of me fears you." He says he can't handle it and he's barely hanging on. The audience, who started out laughing at his funny anecdotes about burritos, gets very quiet. Bo breaks the fourth wall and says, "Look at them, they're just staring at me like, come and watch the skinny kid with the steadily declining mental health," and laugh as he attempts to give you what he cannot give himself. While the audience cheers on the performance, Bo is actually suffering. Bo's words are real. They mean something to him. In one interview, he said he was having multiple panic attacks on stage during this tour, but he was so neurotically overprepared, so he was basically able to continue the performance on autopilot without anybody really noticing. In spite of his on-stage panic attacks, for the audience, it's still just a performance. Then he goes on to explain, "I know I'm not a doctor, I'm a pussy, I put on a silly show, I should probably just shut up and do my job, so here I go." Burnham knows he's privileged. He knows that unlike other jobs, it's not like lives are at stake. He knows that other people suffer far worse than he does. And don't get me wrong, at least Burnham and other successful creative people have all of the resources in the world to get help. And that matters. But success doesn't erase the pain. And sometimes it makes it worse. The thing that's so crippling about creative success is that even after the crowd cheers and goes home, your problems are still there, your vices are still there, and the personal relationships you neglected in order to reach success are strained. The same restless mind that started it all is left to pick up the pieces. Finally, Bo Burnham says this. He spelled out his suffering, and the audience cheers ecstatically. That's why it's so infuriating when a guy like Rick Rubin strolls in and confidently says the audience comes last. It's completely disconnected from how creative success actually works, and he should know that. The audience in commerce is a huge factor in the creative process. As a way to further prove my point that all successful creative work is inextricably linked to commerce, it's time to talk about AnyDesk, their today's sponsor. If you're a designer, creative, or editor working across multiple devices, AnyDesk might be the best tool you're not using yet. I've been integrating it into my workflow and it's kind of a game changer. With AnyDesk, I can remotely access my editing rig from my laptop. The connection is so fast and responsive, it feels like I'm right there in my office, and it works on Windows, Mac OS, and all these other platforms. And because AnyDesk uses a proprietary codec, the image quality stays sharp, even in remote areas or on spotty Wi-Fi. Audio pass-through means I can scrub and edit YouTube videos remotely, and thanks to 99.98% uptime, I know I can rely on it. The direct file transfers are also really useful. No more cloud uploading, no more waiting to sync. I can move raw footage, project files, whatever I need, straight from device to device, instantly and securely. If your workflow lives across many devices or locations, AnyDesk brings it together seamlessly. It's free for personal use, and if you've got a team, they offer tailored business plans. Thanks to AnyDesk for sponsoring this video. Download AnyDesk for free today using my link in the description. Back to the video. The story of Bo Burnham perfectly showcases the second force that drives the destruction of creative people: emotional exposure. And we've barely scratched the surface with this one. Many creatives achieve wild success while being absolutely hated by critics and peers. They get all of the success, but none of the respect. In his video, The Most Hated Artists You Probably Recognize, YouTuber SolarSands makes a smart, well-researched video about one of the most popular painters painters of the 21st century. He pulls quotes from critics and comments about the artist. I hate him with every fiber of my being. The George W. Bush of art. Worthless. I'm ashamed this artist is from my former hometown. And here's what they say about his paintings. They make me want to puke. They are false works. They are awful. Simply awful. It's stupid art for stupid people. People really hated this guy, but oddly enough, as SolarSands points out, the paintings are seemingly harmless. Just some quaint little cottages with glowing windows. The mystery gets even stranger when you learn that at the peak of his career, he was making over $100 million a year selling these paintings, making him quite possibly the most financially successful living painter of the 21st century. So what's the deal? His name was Thomas Kinkade. My good friend Rafi actually worked at Kinkade's company and knew him personally, so he has some first-hand insights into Thomas's mindset and motivations. Rafi told me that Kinkade was heavily inspired by the works of the Hudson River School, an art movement that explored the rugged natural beauty of America. These grandiose landscapes became a kind of Americana. But Kinkade's early work wasn't selling, so he had to market it. In other words, he began to prioritize the audience. So Kinkade took the foundations of rural, honest American values and punched it way up. He made cozy cottages with little smoking chimneys and overgrown gardens. It was a world that felt comfortable and safe. And it was the perfect cultural storm, because his paintings hit right as the shabby chic interior design movement exploded. Cozy, unpretentious comfort was in high demand, and a Kinkade painting fit perfectly in that world. Thomas didn't want to just paint big ideas though. He wanted his art to have a massive impact. He wanted to be a fanatical preacher for the arts, and he explored that scale and monumentality throughout his career. In the same way Walt Disney brought animation to the masses, he wanted to do that for painting. The biggest critique of Kinkade's work is that it's kitschy and emotionally unchallenging. His paintings portray an overly idealized world that was simplistic and completely detached from reality. And plus, Kinkade was a devout Christian and he was not shy about expressing that. Needless to say, his politics and his worldview were not exactly aligned with the art world. But people disagree with artists all the time and still like him, and that doesn't really explain why people hated him so much. SolarSands explores the reasons throughout his video, and he eventually ends up at this quote. The reason the art world doesn't respond to Kinkade is because none, not one of his ideas about subject matter, surface, color, composition, touch, scale, form, or skill is remotely original. I think lack of originality might be part of it, but I still don't think that's the real reason why he's so hated. First of all, it's not entirely true that Kinkade paintings are unoriginal, which I'll show you in a minute, but I do agree that Kinkade's work is not the most original. But even still, there's plenty of unoriginal artwork that's praised. Paintings by the Renaissance artist Raphael come to mind. They're fantastic paintings. I actually love them, but they're not revolutionary, and that's okay. Plus, if we examine some of Kinkade's pieces with curiosity rather than contempt, you'll notice that he actually has some pretty unique things happening in his work. While I'm not a painter, I did teach design sketching at the university level for several years, so I know a thing or two about drawing and composition. The first thing we notice is that he rarely depicts his scenes at eye level. Instead, it's always done from this transcendent God's eye view, like you're looking down at the scene from above. It gives the paintings an almost heavenly feel. Also, many of his paintings have this super compressed, forced perspective, like it's through a telephoto lens. This allows him to fit a ton of undistorted detail in a really small area. I also think the way the paintings are rendered feels hyper-real. Everything has a really high level of detail. It's like looking at a photo with no depth of field, but taken to an extreme. There's no atmospheric perspective or blurring out certain elements for visual hierarchy. Everything is safely visible. There's nothing scary hiding in the shadows. Bottom line, Kinkade is an exceptionally skilled painter. Now, do I like all of these paintings? Not really. And there are some technical issues with them, but honestly, to say that there are no original or interesting elements shows a lack of curiosity. Now, there are good reasons to question Thomas Kinkade as a businessman. He leveraged his Christian faith for promotion, and like all of us, he was pretty flawed. Over time, gallery owners had sales issues which were settled out of court, and looking back 20 years later, it's hard to miss that his art presents no ethnic groups and no cultural variety in the architecture. His art is all idealized representations of a narrow, whitewashed world that doesn't and shouldn't exist. But really, there are plenty of artists out there who have bad political takes or are terrible people, and nobody even bats an eye. So in my opinion, that still doesn't really explain it. Rafi and I talked about it, and we think the real reason why people hate Thomas Kinkade and his paintings is actually a lot simpler. It's cool to not like Thomas Kinkade. Rafi knew him personally, and he said that he was loud, he was confident, he was a bigger guy, he could command a room, and he just didn't fit the quiet, brooding artist stereotype. Kinkade was confusing to the art world. He basically did the exact opposite of what most artists do, even down to the design of his gallery spaces. The art world didn't understand him, and when people don't understand something, their first impulse is to ridicule it. They didn't care that he was trying to make art that was accessible to the average American. They didn't want to understand that his art was a calming relief to people who were happy to imagine something comforting and safe. Kinkade didn't need his audience to intellectualize his art or write a college-level dissertation on art as a cultural statement. He just wanted to paint something pleasant. Is that really so bad? Kinkade also painted other works in a more traditional Impressionist style. When art critics saw this work, but didn't know that they were looking at a Kinkade painting, the work was praised. To me, this supports the idea that the real reason the art world hated Kinkade is simply because it was cool. It was a way to signal to other people that you're part of the in-group among artists and gallery marketeers. But even Kinkade himself got tired of painting these quaint little cottages. He created lots of art that I think is much more expressive and interesting. He desperately wanted these other paintings to take off. Thom knew they were better, but they didn't sell, and it bothered him that the things he enjoyed painting weren't what everyone else wanted. All successful creative people want to be loved. They're saying, look at my deepest inner thoughts with this outward expression. If the audience rejects that expression, artists will think you don't love them. And that really ate away at Kinkade. He was making so much money, and so many people loved his work, but even with all that fame, he was unable to translate any of it into genuine connection. Kinkade's audience wanted quaint little cottages, and the art world demonized Kinkade for giving them exactly that. When Kinkade tried to show us who he was through his paintings, we told him to stop. He gave us what we wanted, and it destroyed him. The real villain was not Kinkade. It's us. Rafi told me that Thom acted like all the criticism didn't bother him, but deep down it did. Ultimately, the pressure, the ridicule, and having to constantly create new paintings that didn't personally resonate with him gradually wore him down. He passed away from an accidental overdose of Valium and alcohol at age 54. Kinkade never found the acceptance he craved from his peers. He was flawed like all of us, and my hope is that this video helps to humanize the man behind the paintings. The thing is, even when the crowd does love you, that can be its own kind of curse. This might seem counterintuitive, so let me give an example. Thom Yorke, the lead singer of Radiohead, wrote Creep as an honest expression of alienation and self-doubt. He became obsessed with a woman he met at university. Yorke said in 1992, "I was in the middle of a really serious obsession that got completely out of hand." He wanted to emotionally process this experience, and the song Creep was born. At first, the song was criticized for being too depressing, but over time, it became an unexpected global hit.
We're playing this one because if we don't, there might be a small riot.
Audience demanded it at every concert, and Yorke began to hate singing it. He felt trapped by the audience's narrow expectations. You can see that tension when he performs the song. He has this almost sarcastic detachment, using these cartoonish facial expressions, almost like he's mocking the song that made him so famous. I can't help but wonder if he hated singing it because of how exposed he must feel. I mean, how would you feel yelling, "I'm a creep, I'm a weirdo," to a stadium full of 50,000 strangers every night for years on end? Every time Yorke sings it, he has to relive the shame that inspired it. It's no wonder he stopped performing the song for long stretches. Listen to this. It's almost like he's saying it bitterly to the audience, like he's saying, "Fine, I'll sing Creep if that's what you really want." Interviewers would ask probing questions about what the song meant and what it was like to be so creepy. Radiohead's first album, Pablo Honey, didn't have any other hit single, so for a couple years, Radiohead was just known as the creepy band with the creepy lead singer who played Creep. How would you feel being known around the world as the weirdo who had a regrettable and obsessive crush on a girl who doesn't even know you exist? At one show, after Thom sings the lyrics, "Whatever makes you happy," someone in the audience yells this. And that somehow makes it worse, because no, they don't love him. They don't even know him. They love his performance. They love his song, but not the person underneath. If they really loved him, they wouldn't make him perform a song that he hates. Thom Yorke said, "It's like it's not our song anymore. When we play it, it feels like we're doing a cover." We project meaning onto artists all the time. I just did it a minute ago. But the truth is, we don't know how he feels. And he's entitled to a private emotional life. The problem is, once you've exposed your pain to the public, that vulnerability becomes impossible to protect. Thom Yorke's personal heartbreak now belongs to the crowd. The audience might relate to Yorke's pain, but they experience it from a safe distance. They don't feel it like he does. To the audience, it's just a chorus to scream along with. It's entertainment. For him, it's real life. This song is about a vulnerable part of his personal history. The ultimate irony of this song is that we are the creeps now. If you read the lyrics, they still make sense if they're sung from the audience's perspective, aimed at Thom Yorke. We're the creeps, staring, obsessing, trying to analyze his every move. What the hell are we doing here? We don't belong inside his private life, yet here we are. The song has become a horror of his own making, where the obsession he once felt for someone else has been turned back on him by the audience. And if the artist decides they don't want to share that anymore, if they pull back or refuse to perform it, they're labeled as difficult and arrogant. They're labeled as millionaire rock stars who are too good for the song that made them famous. I guarantee you, I'm going to get a ton of comments about how all these successful creative people should stop complaining. And look, I get it. It's hard to struggle as an unsuccessful creative person. So these successful people should just shut up and stop whining, right? And to be fair, it's not like they're curing cancer or risking their lives running through a war zone, but that reaction just proves my point. Successful creatives aren't allowed to suffer or have their own feelings. You think they owe you something just because they're fortunate. Why should anyone be forced to relive their most painful moments just because the crowd likes how it sounds? Just like Kinkade, Thom Yorke gave the audience what they wanted. But what they wanted wasn't him. They wanted a version of him that was more like a character. That's the emotional toll no one sees. It's the cost of turning your vulnerability into a marketable, consumable product long after you've tried to move on. And then the media's curiosity creeps in. Everyone wants to know your process, as if dissecting your work will reveal some secret formula. There are some classic interviews where journalists talk to Bob Dylan about his creative process.
I got nothing to say about these things I write. I mean, I just write them. I don't need to say anything about them. I don't write them for any reason. There's no great message. I mean, if you want to tell other people that, go ahead and tell them. But I'm not going to have to answer to it.
He understands that the journalists are just killing his work with all that close inspection. But let's be real, most people can't get away with Dylan's approach. If you're vague about your process, people think you're being guarded or pretentious. If you're too open, you risk sounding arrogant, like you're bragging about how special your mind is. Analyzing the creative process can be valuable. I mean, that's what we're doing right now. But most interviews just want a soundbite rather than a nuanced answer. For better and for worse, you can't be creative without being vulnerable. You have to put your ideas out there even though they're definitely going to be misunderstood. Artists, designers, and other creative people are emotionally attuned and highly sensitive. It's what allows them to notice things that others might miss. One study shows that people who struggle to filter out external stimuli like noises, movement, and visual clutter are more likely to demonstrate original thinking and be gifted creatively. But that same openness can also be their undoing. When that sensitive mind is exposed to public scrutiny, the pressure becomes too much. It's not like other professions. Art and even design is very personal. Once again, for any creative professionals watching this, how would you feel if your most personally vulnerable work was out there for the whole world to see? It sounds exciting, but you're also very exposed. You sacrifice a part of yourself, and once it's out there, you don't get to control how people see it. Just look at the comment section of any big YouTube video, which leads us to our next chapter. Destruction. Destruction is the third force that makes creative success so difficult. All creative work requires sacrifice. The YouTuber Lessons from the Screenplay does a fantastic analysis of Black Swan and Whiplash, two films that capture the destructive side of creative ambition. Natalie Portman plays a ballerina in Black Swan, and Miles Teller plays a jazz drummer in Whiplash. As the movie progresses, their bodies begin to break down under the pressure to perform. They begin to isolate themselves from friends and family. They become singularly focused on achieving that fleeting glimpse of creative brilliance, and gradually descend into a cycle of self-destruction. But destruction isn't necessarily a bad thing when it comes to creativity. That might sound counterintuitive, and I'm not saying that you should become a mentally unstable, tortured artist. I'm not saying that. If you're struggling with mental health, talk to someone or find a qualified mental health professional. To quote Dr. K. Redfield Jamison, "No one is creative when severely depressed, psychotic, or dead." Remember that. Mental illness doesn't make you a great artist. What I am saying is that in order to be successful as a creative person, you will need to shed your old ways of thinking and make room for new perspectives. That destruction and growth can be stressful. The pressure and exposure of creative success can make even the healthiest person unravel if they're not careful. Think of it this way. To be a little bit obsessive is good when perfecting your technique, but too much can make you frozen with anxiety. A little bit of an overactive imagination is great for coming up with new creative ideas, but too much of it is literal insanity. Radical behavior and obsessive focus can go too far. It's a fine line. The characters in Black Swan and Whiplash sacrifice everything to achieve their goals. Their lives are pressure. Even when everything goes right and the audience is happy, there is no way to avoid the mess they make of their lives, of their bodies, and of their sanity. They give everything they have to please people they will never know. The cautionary tale of these movies is that the pursuit of success can feel like freedom, but it can also be a trap. As Byung-Chul Han writes, "In this society of compulsion, everyone carries a work camp inside, simultaneously prisoner and guard. It's exploitation of the self in the search for creative greatness. If you choose the path of creative success, you will become a different person, and this doesn't just happen in movies, it happens in real life." Elvis Presley's relentless pursuit of fame and perfection took its toll. Trapped by a grueling tour schedule and the expectations of fans, he turned to prescription drugs to cope with the pressure. By the end of his life, Elvis was physically and emotionally exhausted, performing in a haze of addiction. This particular show was only weeks before he passed away at the age of 42. You can see him on stage here, barely able to string a sentence together.
I just recorded it and
But as soon as he sits down in front of the piano, he comes alive. He lives to please the audience. Suddenly, the grotesque transformation in Black Swan doesn't seem like that much of a stretch when compared to Elvis. It was just as bad in the 2000s with Amy Winehouse. She was an incredibly gifted singer, but her struggle with addiction played out under the harsh judgment of tabloids and early internet culture. She passed away at the age of 27 after years of public unraveling. I hesitated to include these examples because their pain has been turned into spectacle. But if we're going to talk about the cost of creative success, we can't really ignore the people who paid the highest price. My hope is to reframe their stories as human beings overwhelmed by the pressure that comes with creative ambition. Creative success doesn't just demand sacrifice of the self, it also demands destruction of the external landscape. The most successful creative people destroy what came before, both metaphorically and physically. Iris von Herpen is known for her completely insane, futuristic fashion. The work kind of speaks for itself. She explores cutting-edge manufacturing processes and computational modeling to invent entirely new fashion languages. Her highly technical designs make traditional fabric tailoring feel ancient by comparison. She destroyed the old boundaries of fashion and created something entirely new. Virgil Abloh is another fashion designer who did something very similar but in the complete opposite way. Rather than using new tools, he weaponized old ones. The fashion world is brutally exclusive, and in the early 2010s it was still overwhelmingly Eurocentric, dominated by old legacy designers and luxury houses. There wasn't much space for anyone new to break into the industry, but there was especially no room for a young black man like Virgil Abloh. So he made his own space. Drawing from the DIY ethos of streetwear and remix culture of hip-hop, Abloh staked his claim on existing legacy garments. He bought $40 Ralph Lauren shirts, screen-printed Pyrex and the number 23 embroidery on the back and priced them at $550. They sold out almost instantly. It was his way of saying, if you won't make room for my name, I'll write it directly over yours. Like Duchamp's ready-mades, Abloh's work questioned authorship, originality, and who gets to decide what counts as fashion. Abloh went on to become one of the most influential fashion designers of the 21st century. In 2019, Virgil Abloh was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer, but he continued designing and pushing boundaries until just days before his passing at age 41. Abloh dismantled the fashion world and rebuilt it in his own image. This is the pattern in all creative fields. Creation and destruction are one and the same. All new ideas destroy what we previously believed. But it goes beyond just ideas and into the destruction and remixing of physical matter. Every design demands materials, energy, and labor. A tree has to be cut down and destroyed in order to design and build a musical instrument. We use finite resources to bring physical form to our ideas. Creative technological revolutions show destruction at scale. Photography crushed traditional portraiture. Digital art shook the foundations of physical media. When you create something new, you're destroying something old. That's the price of creation and progress. The real problem with extreme creative ambition is that no matter how high you climb, it will never feel like enough. Trust me. While I'm not a famous designer or anything, I've had a pretty good run. Same thing with these YouTube videos I make. And I'm grateful for that. But honestly, my first video getting 1,000 views felt just as exciting as my first video getting 1 million. It's okay to have ambition, but make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. It's important to remember that creative ambition isn't just about what you're striving towards. It can also be about what you're running away from. So many of my friends who are designers are running away from a cruel creative director or an abusive teacher who constantly told them they weren't good enough. In order to bury the pain of inadequacy, they immerse themselves in achieving creative success so they don't have to face their deeper emotional problems. And as we've seen, that tends to not work very well. Our culture glorifies ambition. You see it in movies, on TV, and you see amazing feats of artistry in your social media feeds every day. We're constantly being bombarded by excellence. You might think that if you just achieve your goals, you'll finally feel secure and accepted, but that type of ambition doesn't really anchor you. It just makes you run for the next milestone. My YouTube career is basically dependent on my ability to get more and more views, so I know better than anyone how hard it is to actually live this. Earlier in this video, I said that all successful creative work is driven by commerce. And I still stand by that. But the kind of creative work that makes life feel meaningful is driven by community. Many creative people think they're chasing success, but what they're actually chasing is connection. When we make something and share it, we're really just saying, this is what I see. Do you see it too? And that's not something you need millions of people to validate. You just need a few friends who really understand you. And that is the foundation of a creative life worth living. These videos take hundreds of hours to make. I read 1,000+ pages of articles and books, I talk to industry experts, and I reflect on my 15 years of experience in the design industry. If you like these videos and you want to help build a place where design and culture is discussed with depth and honesty, then consider supporting me on Patreon. You can sign up for a few dollars a month, and as a show of thanks, you get early access to my videos, plus a few other perks. My plan is to slowly transition to a more audience-funded model for this channel. That way we can talk about the things that you care about. I also want to thank Rafi Manassian and Kyle Dexheimer for helping me with this script. And I want to give a huge shout out to my patrons on Patreon. I sincerely appreciate your support. I couldn't do this without you. I hope you learned something and have a great day.